And so let's get into devolution in a moment, shall we? But one of the points you raised there was about the Supreme Court and also this phrase about the separation of powers. And both of these are, of course, Americanisms, aren't they? And I'm interested to get into the sort of the mindset of these new Labour types in the 90s. And so there's a pamphlet that was actually written about them by a fellow called David Willits, called Blair's Gurus on these thinkers. And the point that he makes at the end, I'll just quote it to you. It was...
Sorry, isn't David Willits a Conservative politician?
Yes, he is. But it was on an examination of New Labour's rhetoric at the time. And one of the points he makes at the end, I'll just quote it to you, is that the dilemma which these Blairites face is that they are seeking to make Britain something else. What they do not like about us is precisely what makes us British. And so would you say that's a fair characterisation of what's really going on behind the New Labour constitutional revolution?
I would. I mean, you can see it's got two sources, Laurie. One of them is America, but more importantly, it's the characteristic post-Second World War states in Europe. And in both of them, both in America and in Europe, there was one dominating feature, which was, and this sounds odd when we talk about America, a deep distrust of direct democracy. The whole structuring of the American Constitution, which is why the classic American will say, we are not a democracy, we are a republic. It's why you have an electoral college, which means that the president is not elected, the president of America is not elected just by a direct majority of whoever votes for whoever whom. You vote on a state-by-state basis, so the result is weighted deliberately towards the smaller states, and the original idea of the actual convention, the electoral college, was that it would actually debate the choice of president, though in fact that was forgotten. Within Europe, and particularly the West German constitution, the case is even more extreme. Enormous checks were built in deliberately against a democratic majority, because of course everybody said, well, Hitler was the result of a vote. He wasn't quite. But you see what I mean? There is this incredible fear of direct democracy. And the way this feeds in, and it's again very important we understand this, it feeds in to something else. It feeds in to this world that actually was already sort of there under Blair, but has become much, much clearer in the decades afterwards. And for this, we've got to go to another very interesting figure, David Goodhart, and his book, which identifies these two groups of people, the somewheres and the anywheres. The somewheres are those, actually a bit like me. I'm a somewhere with the value. I'm an anywhere with the values of somewhere. The somewheres are the people who are here, who are rooted, feel very, very much an attachment to the soil, to their language, to the culture. In other words, most, dare one use the word, ordinary people. The anywheres are the highly educated, the highly mobile, the multilingual, those with superior professional qualifications who can simply flit around, like Rishi Sunak. If you remember, I was on last year. I was severely criticised for saying I didn't feel he was culturally rooted. Nothing to do with whether he's a Hindu or not. It was simply that he was part of this, flitting here, flitting there, house in California, and whatever. But they're associated with increasingly two radically different sets of values. And it is this radically different value set which is legitimated and transformed effectively into law by what the Labour Party did, what New Labour did. And of course, it shows most clearly over immigration. The characteristic anywhere view of immigration is, it's a terribly good thing, because we're all really the same, aren't we? As indeed anywheres are. And does it really matter that lots of people wearing yashmaks and whatever finish up in Finsbury Park or Rochdale and it looks like Mogadishu? No, it doesn't. On the other hand, the old inhabitants of Finsbury Park, if there are any left, and the old inhabitants of Rochdale object very, very much to this. And it is now this tension between one set of values held by the elite and another set of values held by the bulk of the population. And you know what? We've actually had completely to reinvent language. And I want to share with you now something that I think is fairly original, and I don't think has been spelled out before. Why have we needed to invent this word populism? Populism, after all, is simply a vaguely Latin version of what we used to call democracy. Democracy does mean, if you actually look it up in any dictionary of political thought, democracy means the rule by the majority of citizens, or should do. But of course, what's happened with the reinvention of the Blairite state is that it no longer does mean that. As Bingham said, as so many others have effectively said, it means the protection of minorities, including, generally speaking, very antisocial minorities, like, dare we say it, gypsies and Romanis. We've seen the problems in Leeds and so on. It means the active protection of these against otherwise normal, active, responsible, decent citizens. And this produces the most profound tensions. So democracy has been, again, it's a word that's been stood on its head. And the old meaning of what is popular, what most people want, which is what democratic systems were supposed to give, has now become, in fact, a no-no word. Dear me, it's a popular, can you imagine? It's a popular opinion. It's a terrible idea. Most people want it. How absolutely shocking. It reminds me, to finish, we're being terribly serious, it reminds me to finish with a little bit of a joke on this one. Back in the days when I was really famous historically, there were people in my profession, amongst historians, who actually hated the fact, I was swanning around on TV and they were sitting in their miserable little red brick universities and driving nasty Morris Minors, and I had a decent Daimler, and they got very cross with me. And so, of course, I was denounced as this terrible thing, a popular historian. I responded by saying, I suppose it's better than being an unpopular historian. And you see what I mean? It's how these words have all been stood on their head. And one of the first things that those of us on the right, and particularly your generation, will have to do is recapture language.
And that's very much a word that Starmer sort of spits out in his speeches, isn't it? Populism.